them. Okay, so if you can give me a Cliff Notes version of the Quad, because this, to be honest, this came out at a time when I was completely distracted by the coronavirus and everything going on in Victoria and all the madness here. And honestly, I haven't actually taken the time to really begin to wrap my mind around really what it is and the depth of the cooperation. Is this just a surface level cooperation, or is there real substance to this? But then also thinking through the geopolitical implications of this, I haven't even to do that. So if you could help me out, that would be appreciated.
Well, the simplest way to approach that or frame it is that last year, Rory Medcalf, who's an old friend of mine and who is the director of the National Security College at the ANU, published a book called Contesting the Indo-Pacific, Why China Will Not Rule the 21st Century. And he'd taken 10 years writing that book, and it's a really nice piece of work, and I recommend it to your viewers. If you can get hold of a copy, it's a very fine reflection on Australia's geographic and security position. And he argues in that precisely because of China's overweening ambitions, people started to wake up and say, we better talk to one another, this is get out of hand. And it was initially the Japanese Prime Minister, Abe, and Narendra Modi in India, who simply got together and had a long talk, because they're both close neighbours of China. They're both very substantial countries, and they're both starting to get concerned about where this might go. And it became the Quad then, with the US and Australia saying, listen, we share your concerns. And it's emerged slowly and thoughtfully. It's not a bunch of countries saying, well, let's go to war with China and stop it, but rather saying, we want stability and prosperity, and we're not at all reassured by what Xi Jinping is saying as well as doing.
Yeah.
And we need to confer about what we could do to keep him honest, as it were, and to check his ambitions. And if push comes to shove, how we could actually resist. And that process has been getting underway. Initially, the reaction in Beijing was to be derisive and to say, well, this is nonsense, this will go nowhere. And Paul Keating is still spouting that line.
Yeah.
But it's clear that in Beijing, they've slowly realized that actually these countries are conferring, and they are cohering, and they carry a lot of weight, because while everybody talks about the size of China's population and economy, if you combine India, Japan, the United States, and Australia, we're way ahead of China on both counts. Right? And we have strategic depth. One reason they want the Chinese strategists wanted to detach Australia from US alliances, because we're the sheet anchor of its whole security system in the Indo-Pacific, right? We're this massive continent, a long way offshore. We're a thriving democracy, and we're able to provide basing for US forces in between the Pacific and the Indian Oceans, and on the way to the Persian Gulf and through the South China Sea, well away from the immediate vulnerabilities of countries right on China's periphery. And they understand very well in Beijing what advantage that is for the US. And they had hoped that they could suborn us because of our economic interests. And if we had allowed certain interest groups in this country to govern policy, it might well have happened. But now clear that predominant opinion on a bipartisan basis, both the ALP and the coalition is saying, no, I don't think so. Right.
I've got a few viewers who are asking, are we still a democracy? Australia is still a thriving democracy. I understand the skepticism, but if you've been to China, if you spent any time there, you'll understand that there is still a world of difference between the two. I want to talk about the inclusion of India, and this comes back to a question that I was asked a little while ago, and I'm not going to scroll up and find it, but questioning whether, is all of this concern about China actually just giving India a huge opportunity to thrive and potentially become a geopolitical force in its own right? I want to put my own spin on that viewer's question. I'm not particularly concerned about Indian imperialism outside of their immediate region. I don't think culturally they particularly have that in their DNA. But I find it very interesting that the Quad is not an Anglosphere-centric or even Anglosphere plus NATO type of centric body. This really is a fascinating multicultural, multinational body. And I find the four in the Quad a very interesting group. What are the implications from China's point of view? Would they have expected this to happen? And would this concern them more than, say, a NATO or an Anglosphere-oriented body?
I think they didn't anticipate that would happen, and they were dismissive of it, as I said a moment ago, when it began to form, because they've tended to take the propagandist line that China's rise will be peaceful and we have any benign intentions, but don't get in our way because that won't go well for you. In other words, it'll be peaceful just to the extent to do exactly what we want you to do.
That's yes, a little bit close to home. I feel like I've heard that from our premier recently. But anyway, let's not talk COVID.
Well, he's fairly cozy with the Chinese regime, is he not?
Funny that. Anyway, moving on. Moving on. Let's not go there.
But to go back to your question about India, one reason, economics notwithstanding, because we did do very well out of trade with China for years, whereas the US ran huge deficits, we were consistently running big surpluses in our trade with China. And that makes it quite explicable, in fact, why many business people would say, well, don't upset China. We're doing very nicely, thank you. Let's just be pragmatic, right? Yeah. That's not a stupid point of view. It's just that when you look at the bigger picture and realize that it's not just a matter of the US wanting to contain China. The US has bent over backwards to encourage Chinese growth and draw it into partnership. But the party under Xi Jinping is saying, no, we've got our own ambitions. Thank you very much. And so all of its neighbors, including into Japan, have started to say, well, all right, if you're going to play the game that way, you will get pushback. And you're now on notice that we're talking to one another. And if you don't start to behave in a bit more civil fashion, you're going to face a coalition. And that's not because we have any ill will to China. We're opposed to the party and its strategic policy. If you had a democratic China that really wanted to be friends, everybody would want to be friends. We have no reason to want to fight with China. We were doing very nicely out of its growth. Right? So this is the situation. And the thing about India is that we are in a lot of ways more comfortable with India than China because, what everyone thinks of British imperialism in days gone by, it left a largely favorable stamp on India. They still use English as a national language. They have parliamentary institutions. They have a free press. They play cricket. Their army officers are almost a caricature of Sandhurst, and they wouldn't have done that if British imperialism had been all bad for India. Instead, in many ways, they want to be more British than the British, and because we have that same British imperial background, we play cricket, we speak English, we have a free press, we have parliamentary institutions. There's a lot we have in common with India. We have nothing like that in common with China, especially under the Communist Party. And we've been trying in recent years to see whether we can get them, for instance, to like Australian rules football. Can we get them to just appreciate and share with us some things that would make it easier to get along on a natural basis? And it's proving difficult because Xi Jinping and those around him are deliberately making it difficult.